What's up, everybody? So the other day I was messing around with this cool abstract render using geometry nodes, and I thought it looked pretty cool, and I wanted to show you all how I got it done. It's super simple, perfect for somebody who's like just starting out with geometry nodes. Not necessarily meant for a beginner to Blender, but a beginner to geometry nodes. In fact, you can see here that the node setup for this is it. We're dealing with 8 different nodes here. Nothing too complex, so let's jump right into it. All right, so let's grab ourselves a new project, and the first thing we're gonna do is hide the default cube. We're not gonna delete it because we're gonna use it. We're just gonna hide it. I know that's strange. But next, what we wanna do is hit Shift A, and let's add ourselves a plane. Cool. It's a very planey looking plane. The next thing we wanna do is rotate it on the Y axis. So we're gonna hit R, Y, and then 90 to do that. All right. So what we want to do is we want to kind of make this curved a little bit. I think it's a little bit more visually interesting than when looking at a bunch of planes that are completely flat and straight. So in order to do that, we're going to come over to the modifier tab, and we need to first give it some geometry so that we can actually bend this plane. And to do that, let's grab a subdivision surface modifier. Then let's turn it to simple. If we leave it on Catmull Clark and we turn it on, it's going to give us this spherical shape, but we actually still want it to look like a piece of paper. So we're going to hit simple and crank the subdivisions all the way up to 6. This is a super simple piece of geometry, so cranking it up to 6 isn't going to be too hard on our computer. And after that, we're going to hit add modifier, and then we're going to look for something called simple deform. Once you got that added in, let's change it to bend. And nothing's happening here because we actually have to add an object into the modifier to tell our plane what we want to bend around. And so you see we have this origin section right here, and to that we're going to add an empty. So again, Shift A, and then look for an empty. We can use plane axis right here. And then once we go back to that modifier, we can just open this up and choose empty. We're gonna have to look for the right axis that we actually want to deform across, so you can just toggle through. For me, it's gonna be the Y axis right here. And I can change the strength of the angle if I want it to like really wrap. We can just increase that. I want something subtle, just a little bit, just to make it different, like I said, than the normal plane that we spawned in here. So, all right, once we got that all done, we can rename this just so we know what it is, curved plane. And then let's hide it. We can hide our empty. So now let's unhide our cube, select that, then go back to the modifier tab, click add modifier, geometry nodes, and then new. So now we've just added a new instance of geometry nodes to this cube. So if we go to our geometry nodes workspace, we'll have our 2 starting nodes. So in my last geometry nodes video, I talked a lot about a node called instance on points, and how a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing being done with geometry nodes is using that node at some point in the process. So this is no different. We're gonna use that here. So again, just like we're adding anything new, Shift A, search instance on points. Go ahead and throw that in between, and nothing should happen, because we need to add 2 objects. We need to add a points object and an instance object. And just like the name says, we're looking to take, in this case, our curved plane, and we're looking to instance that along another piece of geometry. So anywhere that there's vertices on the geometry plugged into points, we're going to see our curved plane appear on that. So for this project, we are going to actually add something called spiral curve, or curve spiral, my bad. Throw that in here. And then now we want to get our curved plane into this geometry node setup. And the way that we do that is we just come to our outliner right here, hold and drag. And now we have that in this geometry node setup. So then we can go to geometry, into instance, and you'll see our little curved plane being instanced all along this curved spiral. Now this isn't quite what we're looking for. We want to change a couple things up a little bit, but we're most of the way there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to rotate this face. In my original render, I think I had these rotated the other way. So that's pretty easy to do. In our instance on points node, we can actually just find what face we want to rotate along. So I'm just using the y-axis and rotating 180 degrees. Cool. The next thing we want to do is kind of dial in the spiral shape we got going on here. And right now it looks like it's getting smaller as it goes down. I want it to get smaller as it goes up. So we are going to play around with, I think, height. Yeah, there we go. We can drop that down. Something like -9. And then let's actually make the end radius bigger. Cool. We can increase our height a little bit. In this case, again, make it smaller because we want it to go top down and wider as it gets to the bottom. Now we can increase our rotations, which will fill out this. If we come over here and turn on our shaded view, our render view, we can start to see a little bit more detail here. Let's drop the resolution down. I don't want that many pieces of our curved paper. Maybe something like 16, I think is what I did in the original. We can play with the height some more. Just get some more variation. Yeah, that's not looking too bad. Okay, cool. So another thing that we want to do is we put a little bit of a curve into that piece of paper, but I want it to look a little bit more turbulent than that. And that's relatively easy to do. We can actually just move these guys over and add a set position node and throw that right in between our curved plane, and our instance. And the set position node will give us this offset. And if we put procedural noise into the offset, we will actually then be able to kind of distort the shape pretty easily. So let's come here and hit Shift A, and we're looking for a noise texture. Now we can plug that factor into the offset, and you can see that it's made a lot of noise. It's definitely way too much, so we want to back it off. But first we want to switch this to 40, and then let's bring that roughness down. Let's bring the scale down. Turn up the W a little bit, and the W is just going to give us, it's kind of like a seed. It gives us different iterations of that shape. Or different iterations of the noise, sorry. And we can just kind of dial it in. Like I said, I don't want anything too extreme. And this is all personal preference. Kind of like that. I kind of like backing off the resolution a little bit on our spiral, but adding more rotations to it. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do to start to really dial in our look here is actually be able to add in a material. So to do that with geometry nodes, we can't just come over to our material tab right here and add a material. You can see there's actually one in here, but if I start changing the color, nothing happens. And one of the reasons why is we actually have to tell geometry nodes what material we want to use. So to do that, we're going to add a set material node. So Shift A to add, and then come up here and search for set material. Boom. Now, if we drop down this menu, we'll see our red material, and we're not going to keep it red. That was just for a placeholder. In fact, that's kind of murder on the eyes. So we're going to change that. Okay. Now, if we go back into our layout, you know what? I think I do want to add some more resolution. We just don't want it to get too busy. So we start getting this weird overlapping, but I kind of like the way this is looking here. And again, this is your project. Feel free to change any of these parameters. And one of the things that we can do to actually make it easier to change parameters is we have this group input node over here. And if we notice that there's a parameter that we're changing a lot, like our resolution and rotation, we can actually start to drag those off back into the group input. And what it'll actually do is in our modifier tab, we now see that we have these number fields for those characteristics that we dragged off into the group input. So we can now actually just adjust them this way versus in the geometry nodes workspace. So another factor that I think I want to drag off is probably the W, because that's, again, helping kind of control and figure out what we want this thing to look like. So we can drag the W off into there. And the cool thing is we can actually rename these. So if you see this arrow right here, we actually now have access to what these are called. And so, for example, like W, I can just change to like noise, because that's probably a little bit easier to remember than W. At least it is for me. You can hit N to open or close that tab. But yeah, cool. So let's hop back into our layout and let's pilot our camera. So to get into our camera, we can go to View and then Cameras and then Active Camera. Or what I like to do is I've actually changed it to be able to hit 0 on my keyboard. And the way that this is set is it's actually set to having a keyboard with a number pad on it. So the extra set of number buttons to the right of your arrow keys. If you don't have a number pad keyboard, like I don't, then what you can do is you can actually come to Edit, Preferences, go to Input, and then select Emulate Numpad. And so now your top row of numbers on your keyboard will emulate the numpad of a numpad keyboard. So to get into our camera, the easy way, we can just hit 0 and now we can see our shot. So one of the things that I like to do is come over into the N menu and then go to View and then Camera to View. We're locking this. So now as I move around my scene, my camera is moving with me. I think this is just a little bit of an easier way to move this camera versus the other method of grabbing this and then trying to use G or your move tool to place the camera. But anyway, back to what we're doing. So we're just dialing in our camera. For this, I like to use cycles because we're just rendering out a single frame of this, so it's not too bad. Cycles, and then if you have a GPU or a graphics card, make sure you turn that on. Then let's go to our render view and start to see what we got here. So one of the things that I know that I definitely want to do is I want to add a plane underneath here, just in case if there is anything that's kind of like a gap where you can see through. I want to add a plane here. Oops. Shift A and then mesh plane. Make that big. And then GZ so we can move it down. All right. Let's go back to our camera view. Definitely want to make that a little bit bigger. All right. Cool. So let's now add our material. In order to do that, like I said, we've already added it in the geometry node section, but now I want to actually do something more interesting than just this white material. And so let's grab our mass of floating paper or cards or whatever you want to call it and go to our shading tab. So in the original render, the way that I got that kind of cool geometric shape is by I found a picture or texture on Unsplash. So let's head back over to Unsplash. All right, perfect. So this is actually the texture that I used in the first render. So I'm going to leave a link in the description down below so you guys can come and grab this. Again, this is totally free, so just make sure you hit download and then kind of take note of the name of it. Okay, cool. So back in Blender, we need to tell this material to use the image that we found instead of white for the base color. So let's hit Shift A and add an image texture and then hit open. All All right, so navigate down to that photo and hit open image. So now we can drag that into our base color. Woo, there it is. So I want a little bit more control over this image. And one of the ways that I'm going to do that is I'm going to add in a color ramp in between our image texture and our principal BSDF. So Shift A and then search color ramp. And now we can kind of dial this in a little more. So we can actually change that secondary color where the white is. So if you wanted to like do something kind of like gold, you could do that. I think I kind of actually like more of like a black on black kind of look. Black on gray. So I also kind of want to raise the roughness just a little bit. Another thing that I want to do is I actually want to give these layers some more texture. And so I'm going to actually grab a bump node. And I can take the color and feed that into the height and go from normal to normal. And now you can see that it looks like we have like a raised part to this texture. And I think that's just a little more visually interesting than what we had going before. I'll raise the metallic a little bit, just play around with it. It's kind of that white look that we had in the first render. That's cool. Okay. So let's pop back out in the layout. The other thing that I forgot to do is I forgot to actually assign a texture to our plane down here. So highlight that, go into your material tab, make a new material, and then just drag that all the way down to black. And then the other thing that we want to do is I actually want to make the environment black. So the way that we can do that is by going into this world tab right here and then hitting color, and same thing, dragging that black. So now the only thing that's affecting our scene is our scene lights, which in this case is a point light, which I want to get rid of. What I want to do instead is add a area light. I think they're just a little softer looking. I think I like the way that they handle shadows better. So we're going to hit Shift A and then look for light and then area light. Perfect. So now with our area light, we can come into the settings and let's crank that up to like 500. And then let's make the size of it a lot bigger. And then we can actually, oops, where are you? Area light right here. Cool. Grab our move tool and kind of raise that up a little bit. All right, we're getting closer. Make sure you're pivoting your camera around and looking for an angle that seems most interesting to you. And I'm still not super happy with the way that this is looking, the shape of our kind of our object here. So I'm going to go back into our geometry node setup, kind of keep messing around with these values. In fact, to make it easier, I'm going to drag them all off so that I can look at them from the layout view instead. So another thing we can do to kind of help, not help, but kind of change the vibe of the render is we can come into our camera settings over here and go to the camera tab and then actually change our focal length. Like we can make this like 85. Yeah, there we go. And then kind of zoom out a little bit. We can zoom in. What I want to do too is actually, oops, I'm locked in my camera here. What I want to do is I actually want to add some like defocused areas to this. And the way that I like to do that is by adding an empty and then letting the empty control the focus distance. So we have this empty here. We can just rename that focus. come back into our camera settings, and then turn on depth of field, and then go and select focus. And now, if we turn on our render view, and we crank that number all the way down, you can see that the only part of the image that's in focus is where this empty is, and we can actually move that to change our focal area. Now I think that's a little too strong. So let's give a little bit more. Let's take away some of that depth. I don't know, like maybe 0.3. I want to make this lighting a little bit more dynamic, and I think that having the light directly above is not the most interesting way to light this. It's not too bad. So I want it to be a little bit shinier, and one of the things that's preventing it from doing that is actually probably that bump. So we can back that off and make that like 0.4 on both values, 0.4. Come back here. We can see that we're getting a little bit more sheen put back into the image. That's cool. So one of the things that I did was I came back into the geometry nodes tab, and I actually just made each of these pieces smaller by dropping the scale on our instance on points, and then readjusted my my starting radius to kind of close up the hole in the center here, and then brought up the rotations to fill everything else up, and that's starting to look more like how I want it to look like. Again, all of this is totally up to your discretion and how you want to art direct the image. But that's pretty much it for this whole tutorial here. I'm going to leave up the geometry nodes set up, so if you guys want to copy some of these values to make it look exactly like this render, you can do so. So here's that for you all. And then in addition, remember we drug off a lot of the values into our group input, and you can see them here. So be sure to grab those if you want them. As always, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. If there's any topics you want me to cover, I would love to know about it. So any suggestions help there as well. Other than that, have a great day.